What does the future of work look like in 6, 12, 2 years from now? 6 months, 12 months, 2 years from now.
Yeah, we think the future of work has three main elements. The first is that it's digital, and this is already all these things are already happening. So we think future of work is almost a misnomer. It's basically the present of work for most
Uh
people.
huh.
But work has moved online, and by that we mean into the cloud, into your browser, such that all of your work and all of your team are now basically in the same place in the metaverse. The second trend that we see is that work is distributed. While your team and your work are digitally in the same place, people themselves are physically spread out across time zones and geographies, even countries now. And the third key trend that we see is that work is much more asynchronous. Because people are spread out across time zones and geographies, they can't meet all the time. And so people have to work and respond and collaborate, not necessarily at the same time and place every single day. And so those three trends, work being digital, work being distributed, and work being necessarily asynchronous, we think are driving the future. And we don't really have to look very far to see what the future of work looks like, because there are several professions that are actually living in that future. Developers started using tools for distributed collaboration in their browsers 20 years ago. And so they give us a bit of a roadmap in terms of how people can successfully work together, even when they're not in the same place. And the first key innovation that developers came up with is a language called Git, which basically allowed developers to compare any two pieces of code next to each other. And that was really helpful because when you're developing software products, if you're working together, your code has to match up perfectly with somebody else's code. And you need to understand what exactly changed from one person's version of their code against yours. And so Git was essentially a comparative language that allowed people, in different coasts of the country, or even on different continents, to basically compare any two pieces of work. And then the second innovation that developers came up with that has changed the way software is developed is GitHub. And GitHub is essentially a workflow collaboration platform that sits on top of Git that helps developers do very basic types of collaboration, like get a review on a piece of code that they've written to merge into the master code base. And so Git and GitHub revolutionized software development, because before those innovations, in order to work together with a developer, you literally had to bring your desktop next to somebody else's desktop, pull up the lines of code, and then look at them visually and manually one by one to understand what changed. And so as with Git and GitHub, developers could work together anywhere, anytime, and they didn't necessarily have to do it synchronously. They could use GitHub to basically send requests back and forth. And if you contrast that with how you and I work today in documents, we're still doing a lot of manual work in order to get very basic things done, like seek feedback or request approvals, or just get a sense of like, hey, did Jeff look at this document? And so developers and then also designers with the advent of Figma are essentially now living in a world that is entirely digital, entirely distributed, and mostly async.